Hi, and welcome to the Belly to Belly podcast. This is the podcast that's focused on confessions of an in-person marketer. So today it's a real privilege to welcome David Berkowitz from Serial Marketer. Welcome, David.
Thanks so much. Great to be here, Bill.
It's super to be with you today. And so our audience are B2B companies who are either entering the U.S. or already in the U.S. And expanding. So these are international companies that, again, are either on their way here or are already here and really working hard to develop a strong base of customers. So they're always super concerned about making sure their marketing is spot on and very focused on the U.S. customer and how to engage and enroll those customers most efficiently. So I'd love to dive into a variety of topics today that would really help those our audience and those customers. I guess probably the best place to start is really to learn a little bit more about you and Serial Marketer. But do you want to just take a minute or two and share kind of a little of your background and Serial Marketer?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've had a mix of roles over the past 20 years where I spent most of my career so far on the agency side, working at 360i under Dentsu and MRY under Publicis Group in strategy and marketing leadership roles. Then went on past 5 years, been focused on working with a lot of tech and product companies and trying to help them figure out how to generate demand and work with expanding their presence in the U.S. Work with a number of international companies that were either overseas initially or had already come here, but then but this was still a very new market for them in the States, and helping a lot with positioning and strategy, some outright business development, and along the way, a few years ago, I started this marketing community, Serial Marketers, that's just been a lot of fun to build out. And so now we have more than 2,000 marketers in the community, and it's just been a great way to go and connect a lot of talented folks with each other and source ideas and gigs and opportunities, recommendations, things like that.
That's fantastic. Well, and I think besides that, you're very modest. For the audience, you should know that David is one of the most sought after mentors in the New York ecosystem to help companies entering the U.S. with marketing. So we're very fortunate to have you here with us today, David. And so with that, let's talk about obviously there an ever expanding array of tools that a marketer has sort of at their disposal to help create awareness and create opportunity with various markets. But when you sort of survey the current landscape of tools that are available for marketers, and particularly companies coming into the U.S., what are the kind of the top tools that or top modes that you would point to as where maybe companies should look first to begin creating connection into the U.S. market?
Well, so a lot of what I see is that companies either try to get a lot of their marketing in place but then not have a great way to distribute that and get that in front of the right buyers, or on the flip side, I see a lot of companies that they start with getting a salesperson on the ground, but then don't have any kind of presence. And so I think one of the things that especially a lot of newer businesses to the States, and this is true more broadly, that they don't always appreciate is that people like to buy from someone they've heard of, and so it's like when you're just a lot of it is just finding that right balance, and so you do need relationship. I mean that like that's just the best shortcut, if there is any, where you can get directly in front of the target buyer. But if you don't have great messaging, if you don't have any presence, if you're not doing anything to stay top of mind beyond that, then that's going to fizzle really quickly. You're going to max out on typically those low hanging fruit, and then it's like, what are you doing with the rest of that time? And then and also a lot of the work on the marketing front isn't going to immediately bear fruit, but it's stuff that kind of like you have that compound interest over time. And so the more content you put out there, for instance, then the more materials you have for your sales team when they're following up with folks, the more hooks you have out there for marketers who are looking for something related to what you do to actually find you. And so the more opportunities you have to have that third or fifth or 10th touch point with a prospect, all of this adds up. And the one thing I really appreciate as a business owner and someone working with a lot of companies like this is that it's tough to juggle all that, especially when you have limited resources or you're newer to a market.
Right. So in terms of the modes, I heard content. So you're talking about either online content or offline content, things that you might distribute, and so on. What other modes might a company avail themselves of when they're coming into the U.S. market? Again, thinking specifically of B2B type companies.
Well, so much of it is fishing where the fish are. So the event space is so weird right now, as you know better than I do. But trying to take part in these events and having the best possible presence that where things are still going to be virtual looks like, even as vaccines pick up in the States and other Western markets, it's like there are going to be a lot of people who are skittish for the rest of the year and kind of writing this off, even if we have some events coming back online this fall. But finding new ways to meet those prospects is so key. I mean, I've learned about a ton of great businesses through virtual events this year, and trying to find the ones that are most relevant to your business and field, where you can also provide a lot of value to them and to their attendees. It's huge because it is with the right kinds of events and look, I'm biased too. There are tremendous communities out there, and what's great is that there are communities for anything and everything right now. So if you're trying to reach the CRO or the head of HR or the head of procurement, like there are ways to find them, and also ways that aren't just an ad buy, aren't just like putting your logo on something. So it's they're just tremendous ways to add value to people who really need it.
I'm so glad that you used a fish metaphor, and we're actually going to come back to that in just a moment. But before we do it, I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of, when whether you're mentoring or working with a company entering the U.S. What are the biggest mistakes that you see them make, or the biggest challenges you see them have?
So I think that there are mistakes at a lot of different points in the whole like sales and marketing cycle. Some of it is just talking so much about what the company does and not solve it, and not clearly trying to solve anyone's problems. Sometimes there's just a lack of focus. Like this company that's a lot of companies have developed a lot of products, a lot of features, and are just like trying to throw all that out there. It's like what's the one that's going to get someone to pay attention, to just get them in, or get someone into that process, so that you can, with that land and expand type approach, like how do you at least just get to have that first meeting, and then where appropriate, you can find out more about what they're doing and see if you have something else that can expand on that and serve more of their needs. So there are a lot of great companies on the tech side that are just started by engineers and folks who just don't necessarily prioritize the role of language and just tightening up those kinds of messages, just making sure that even, I mean, there was a major consulting firm I was looking at recently, and I was giving them some advice in the course of just this conversation of what we could do together. And I said, look, like for a firm like this that's trying to cast a really impressive presence and they're coming in from overseas, it's like you should just have a rule that you are not going to use paid stock photos on your site. Like just and every page of their site looked like the same WordPress template. I could have my developer in the Philippines, who's amazing, like she could do what they did in like 3 hours of work, and they probably spent millions of dollars on their own presence on that side of it. And so and I think there's also, one of the things that comes up a lot on the as you skew into the sales side of it, because for me, that line between marketing and sales blurs more and more all the time. And often my favorite client is the head of sales or revenue, and not necessarily the CEO who's doing a lot of things. Like, how can I help that CRO do their job better? But on that sales front, like there's so many, especially earlier stage companies, who just want to throw out a lot of commission agreements and say, like, yeah, so I'll give you 5%, I'll give you 10% for any deal, but not put any money on the table and not actually pay for people's time. And so you just wind up being last on the priority list with that. And so just making some concerted investment, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to spend 6 figures on a hire here either, but having a little more a little more skin in the game, and having that right kind of structure goes a very long way.
Yeah, the adage, you get what you pay for, right? It's and salespeople in the U.S. are certainly used to earning a lot of money. The best performers are well into 6 figures, and some even approaching 7. So yeah, no, it's a really great point. So the idea of messaging, the idea of having a strong sales effort and strong sales comp and a strong team, no, those are all sound really important. I guess as we think through the challenges that companies coming in have. Do you see? I guess one of the things that we've seen is maybe maybe it's partly a reticence to sell, in place of that, just sort of more marketing and more sort of e-marketing, whether that's sort of bludgeoning the prospect with e-newsletters or just relying on content or search to create opportunity. And I am a huge advocate of inbound marketing, and it's certainly brilliant. But people just aren't picking up the phone like they used to, right? I mean, now we're on Zoom and so on, but we don't see a lot of that, and there seems to be a great fear of actually talking to a customer. But what are your thoughts about that? Do you see much of this?
I see a lot of that, and I saw with with my own outreach for clients last spring. It became really unpredictable, and I actually had a client who said to me, apparently seriously, like they talked to me in 2020. They're like January, February, we're getting such amazing responses, and then March came. What happened? I'm like, really? And by the way, they're targeting brick and mortar businesses, right? So the hardest hit sector. This wasn't someone that was in some suddenly booming field right now. But I think also, and some of it also might be like everyone at all stages on all sides is just getting bombarded by so much bad messaging, bad marketing, like bad sales materials that I think there's this added appreciation for someone who's coming in and actually sending something that is clearly a personalized message, even if it's a cold message, right? That this is someone who's taking a little bit of time to try to understand what that what that potential customer is doing, what they're going through, and how you're meeting that need. It's usually pretty clear to be able to go and see what passes that sniff test. And so I think on the flip side, just like how people are so many folks I know, like you and I, who are craving to get back to in-person events and make some of those connections and just like get those muscles working again. I think there's also this appreciation for just people who are taking the time to say, just here's something that is meant just for you. And I see this all the time. Like I'll post projects on Fiverr, right? Like really like low end things. And for the handful of posts that aren't copy and paste jobs, I'm like, yeah, I get so excited, and you can tell them right away. And this is also true on that enterprise sales front. So it's like not being skittish, especially, can you actually provide value to the person on the receiving end of this? And it's like if you can, then you should be really confident about that. I know I'm excited when I get on a call with someone. I'm like this is exactly what I do. This is exactly how I can help. And I know the other end of that feeling. And it's like, do I even want to bother pitching this? Because I'm just going to be some also ran, or I happen to be the person they called, but like I don't know why they're really calling me, right? Those are totally different calls. So, but when you've got something of value for them, like make sure that's clear. Like then odds are they're going to need it, or they'll at least appreciate the conversation. Maybe they'll learn something new.
It's funny, as you were talking, I was just having this flashback to all the terrible messages I get on LinkedIn. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe 5 a day messages of somebody trying to sell me something, and everything from, personal financial planning to, something for the office, or, there's probably 2 messages a day for people that can help us somehow with SEO or redesigning our website or whatever. But it's just, the number of messages today, I think you're absolutely right. We've got to find ways to differentiate ourselves. And it may be having unique modes, or it may be having unique messages. But do you have thoughts on that? Do you get a lot of messages on LinkedIn of people trying to sell you something?
Tons, and so much of it is like, I mean, I love when people are like, oh, it's we're like-minded. You don't know. And by the way, I really like different-minded people too. So less emphasis and this stuff like, oh well, we have lots of mutual connections, we should connect. That means absolutely nothing. And so many of these that are just outright spam. I mean, I had someone today that said to me, like because of your focus on resume writing, these aren't even keywords that are in my profile. So at least if you're going to go and do this, then like just get your filters in order. Get a little bit of that personalization layer in place, and so and sometimes you do want to figure out ways to scale this, but spending a little more time on your targets goes a very long way. And I think so much of it is going to come down to the golden rule, right? Yeah, do unto others as others do to you, and it's like market and sell to others like you want people to market and sell to you. And again, that's going to go a very long way.
No, good point. So off the top, you talked about the importance of messaging, and if we can, I'd love to dive into that more. And you began down the road of using a fishing metaphor, and we always in kind of our world always talk about sort of the three decisions somebody that fishes makes, and how actually that resembles marketing. And it sounds like that's sort of the metaphor that you work on too. So first, obviously, they decide what they want to catch, and then that informs where they're going to go fishing, and then, of course, third, what bait they're going to put in the water. And it's obviously the selecting of the fish is critical. But I think what most people don't appreciate is that there are 34,000 species of fish. Mm-hmm. So the good marketer, the good person that fishes, actually the harder decision they make is the 33,999 species they don't want to catch, right? Because that, as you know, as a marketer, having that clarity really changes your ability to choose where you're fishing and what bait you're going to put in the water. And I think maybe in terms of the messaging, we're really talking about the bait. That's whether it's the value proposition or call to action or sort of any of the other elements that would draw and convert attention to our product or service. But when you think of messaging and you think of maybe some of the challenges that you see companies having, and I think you gave a little bit of an overview of it in kind of your first comments, but when you think about messaging and whatnot, what are the challenges you see international companies having when they're building or relating their messaging into the marketplace?
Well, I think usually it comes down to just not having any clarity in terms of what they actually do, what problem they're solving. It might be some industry buzzwords there, but it's like, okay, so you've got this thing, and this is what you're saying, like the category that it's in, but is this designed to go and get people into my store? Is it designed to get people to my website? Is it designed to go and get me more leads or more sales? Who is the right person who should be reading this, and like, are you really solving their problem? I'm also glad you brought up the call to action piece of it, because it's amazing how often that is buried. It's also funny how there are often words that are used like learn more that are just a contact form. But and to your other point, it's okay to just say what you want them to do when they get there. So getting the sense of how you're actually going to go and provide that value and what you want someone to do with this information. Also, I think with the call to action, even when it's there, it can often be buried. And so if someone does think that this could be relevant for them, just like give them a chance to go and share some of that info with you right away and express that interest, and then not wind up having them to consume all these other things to get there. I think another mistake can be relying overly heavily on just one type of communication. Like I just saw some pitch the other day that was full of video links and case studies and things like that, but there was no text associated with it. And so video is terrific when produced remotely well, and yes, you can sum up a very long page of content in maybe a 60-second video clip. That's terrific. There's so many people like myself who just don't like clicking video. I don't like watching some kind of demo unless we're really, really into this and like already committed. And on the flip side, you have some of these pages that are just like all text, just like is there just a really concise way to sum this up? Can you use some imagery? Can you use some video to just go and tell that story a little bit better? But accepting that there are different types of buyers, just like there are different types of learners, and how do you go and meet their needs? And this doesn't have to be overly complicated. I know it's talking about a lot, but this can be delivered in really concise ways that it's just give enough of this information and then make it very easy for someone to follow up and get more as needed. It doesn't all have to, you don't need every last page of your documentation out there on your website for everyone to see before they're even working with you.
No, I think that's some really great points in there. So if we were going to sort of unpack it and sort of look at, from a practical sense, how do we go about, let's just take, it could be, maybe let's just go with that. If we wanted to create a one-page sell sheet and we wanted to sort of look at a schematic of what might be the elements of that, and then, what order should they go in? So, and I quite often think about, the techniques that are used in inbound marketing when I think about, how do we get this so it makes the most sense to the receiver. But if you were creating a headline for, we use the ubiquitous widget, the industrial widget, let's say, how would you get the, sort of the attention of the potential reader? What might be the headline of that? And obviously we don't need the actual physical headline, but what would be the attitude and focus of that headline?
Well, two things. First of all, before even getting into the headline, one of those mistakes that I see companies make is that collateral often feels like some really junior person's job, and it's like, yeah, let's get a marketing coordinator or some really like just cheap outsource hire to go and work on this thing. Like who's the most junior person on the team who can do this? And this, it's such a crucial tool for the sales team that even in marketing roles that I've had, I get very hands-on when it comes to something like a one sheet, and I've just come to appreciate that I have experience in having an ear for what the customer wants, that someone who's a year in the field might be even a gifted writer, like they're just not likely to have that. So one is just making sure that you have that you just appreciate the value of it, because it can make a difference if someone is going to follow up with you. It can make a difference in how well a salesperson can present what you do, and give the sales team that confidence to do their jobs well. So with that headline, first piece of it is what problem are you solving? And so in this industrial widget company, if this widget is used to lower manufacturing costs by 25%, if it's used to speed up your efficiency by 40%, if it's used to go and penetrate new markets, like then make that really clear. And ideally, like also for one sheets, I really like a verticalized focused form. So even little things like is there some photography or iconography that just makes it clear that, okay, this is like, this one's for the real estate industry, but this one's for the banking industry. And just, if you saw these pieces of collateral just spread out on a table somewhere, you could easily pick up the one that was most relevant. At these little hints of it go a very long way, and also it helps assure the buyer that you're sharing something that was meant for them.
So what I heard there is really have, number one, have a really clear buyer persona, who it's being written for, that archetype, and also making sure that there's on the design side, the maturity level, experience level, to be able to both have that empathic ear to understand that archetype, that buyer, and also be able to articulate the message in a way that's effective, and the message being something that is somehow provocative to either the problem or the opportunity. So what's keeping the buyer awake at night, or what the strongest part of the value proposition, as you said, save 25% or 25% more efficiency, or something that is provocative in terms of the value proposition for the buyer. Is that a reasonable summary?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's because it's interesting, because there are lots of ways that we sort of evidence how companies communicate. Certainly, looking at their sell sheets, walking through a trade show, and looking at sort of the whether it's the large banners that are hanging from the ceiling, or the tops of the booths that have all the messaging. And it's so rare that we see clear messaging about what a company does, or the value proposition for the customer. It's generally taglines or slogans that really have nothing to do with the customer's benefit. And so I think it's a really interesting way to approach the design of communication. It's much more empathic, and certainly one that much more resembles what happens in inbound marketing. Inbound marketing, right, it's sort of all about putting some bait out and seeing, essentially by the quality of your bait and the alignment with your persona, you'll get nibbles, and everybody else sort of swims by. And it's sort of a really interesting way to market. So as we're looking more at that sell sheet, we're going to have good imagery or iconography. We'll have that good headline that is, sort of targeted at our specific audience in terms of value proposition or problem statement. And then what do we do with the sort of the rest of that document? What are the other elements that need to be included?
So the other elements, you want to describe very clearly what you do, a very small taste of your company's story, and that elevator pitch for why you even exist in the first place. Even having a little bit of that, dare I say, personality come through, and make this something that someone's actually interested in reading. Having a concise roundup of some of the features that you have, and usually a bulleted list works well for that. Just making sure that this is like as plain English as possible. It's debatable to the extent where visuals of or from your product can be really helpful. Like, I've dealt with a lot of data-heavy companies, for instance, that you shrink something down to something that's 1/16 the size of this one pager, and it's totally useless. So sometimes product shots are great. Sometimes you don't have a very visual product, or one that you can't really or can you at least do something that, like, where for someone that really likes showing off a whole dashboard, for instance, just cut that one tiny little visual hook from it. Yes, it feels so tough to do that because you're not showing the whole thing, but that's not what this kind of one sheet's for. And if there's something where visuals become extremely important, then you can have a page 2 or even a page 3 that's just like a few of these very strong images, and you have them front and center, and just allow more space for them. There isn't this hard and fast rule that a one sheet has to be one sheet. Often you're going to lose people if there's too much text to go more than one page. If you have a couple of supporting materials out there, then I mean, sort of like writing a resume. So most can be done in one page. Pretty much all can be done in two. Once in a while, you get a certain circumstance where it warrants like having all your supporting materials that are included there to show your credentials. Speaking of credentials, the client logos are huge. Not everyone has them, and sometimes also I've seen client logos work against some businesses where, say, a business that's only targeted financial services brands and now wants to expand into healthcare. Then seeing a lot of those financial services brands can be confusing, especially if you have too many of them. So you may even want to then include, like, okay, so you put Goldman Sachs, you put Citibank on there, but you don't put the 5 others, because then you just is actually doing less, or putting a kind of random brand. And then you have Douglas Elliman from the real estate industry. Okay, well, that doesn't really fit, but it actually shows more diversity in what you're doing. And so it doesn't pigeonhole you in a way. And just trying to tell that story the best way possible. Ideally, if you have a good line or two from a client testimonial, that kind of social proof, very helpful. And also going back to the call to action piece, what do you do with this information? How do you make it so easy for someone to follow up? Say you've done a really good job with this sell sheet, and now someone has actually forwarded that to someone else in their company to take a look at it. Or we're back to live events, and this gets passed around. Most of them get like littered on the show floor, but there are a few of those that actually people are reading, but it's disconnected from when they're having that conversation with you at the booth or in any other context. Can this stand on its own and kind of be very clear what you can do with this information? And just some of the basics like that often fall by the wayside, because they're like, oh, well, this will just be attached to an email. And so, of course, they'll just be able to email that person directly and forget what else can happen with this once it could potentially have a life of its own.
No, yeah, I mean, that idea that one person's going to hand it to another, or even that person who takes it originally, they don't actually look at it or act on it for a couple of weeks, and the memory's faded a bit. So it's almost like new information. There were several things that I thought that were really profound that you mentioned. Number one is bringing up resumes, and sort of as you were talking about that, I think of the sort of purpose of a resume, and I wonder if this also applies to sell sheets. So the very simple purpose of a resume is simply to get an interview. And once you have the interview, the resume becomes a lot less a part of the process. It's simply to open the door. And, thinking of B2B sales, is it similar in terms of that sell sheet? Really, the only job of that sell sheet is to be a tool in the process of getting that first appointment with a prospect. And once you have it, that may be a part of additional information or whatnot that you'd supply, but ultimately it's sort of served its purpose. And so the information on it, just like a resume, should be simple enough that it opens that door, but not so complex that it stops the process in some way. Is that resonate at all with kind of your thoughts and philosophy?
Very much. For any of this, it's just how can it move things forward? How can it contribute to momentum? And that means that most of the time it doesn't have to go and close that deal. It has to share enough to generate some of that interest. It doesn't have to go and help them completely decide everything right then and there. There are lots of valid reasons why some businesses are very transparent with pricing, and some are not, and not having pricing might turn off some potential buyers, but if that doesn't work for you, there isn't a hard and fast rule for that either. But if your pricing makes it very easy for someone to convert quickly, then sure, showcase that. How do you get that next step to happen? And on the B2B side, that next step is usually a series of conversations and meetings before a deal is closed.
Right. So the resume doesn't get the job and the sell sheet doesn't close the deal. It's just a sort of an early stage part of the process that helps create first a little bit of awareness. Maybe it begins the process of trust building, and hopefully helps you on the road to getting that conversation or that series. Is that?
And there is also that rule of, you want the resume to do no harm. You don't want it to hurt your chances of getting a job. So in the past, I remember looking at my resume, fortunately quite a number of years ago, but like I caught all these typos in it, and like I'm a writer and editor, right? So for me, it's especially sloppy. And at the time, it was something where my resume was clearly not my priority, and it showed. But my resume clearly was doing me harm. And I've seen sell sheets like that too. So it's just making sure that it's not working against you in some way. And refer also to the point of just not making it the lowest priority of what you have to do, and often signaled by having the lowest paid person you deal with working on it. It's like just elevate that, give it some of that respect, make sure that if you do have whether it's in head of marketing, you might not even have one, or just like that even that junior person knows if you have to have them do this, that the founder is actually going to go and review it. It just makes it clear that this is something of importance, something of value.
No, it totally makes sense. So good, kind of going and just finishing up on this topic, going along your lines of the sort of wordsmithing and getting that correct. What are your thoughts about jargon and technical terms?
Depends on the audience, and so how technical is your audience or not? Like, if you're dealing with salespeople, having the abbreviation ROI makes a lot of sense. If you're dealing with marketing folks, then saying that this is designed for the CMO instead of spelling out Chief Marketing Officer, like, it makes a lot of sense. But then I was talking to a doctor the other day and mentioned my work as a CMO, and she said, "Well, that to me just always means Chief Medical Officer." Right. Yeah. And so accept it. So even if you're dealing with, say, marketers at a hospital, having some of that clarity in terms of what you're referring to, it's like just trying to get in the other person's shoes become really important. And yeah, like a CTO, CIO, get as technical as you want, and where being a little too generic and make them think that you don't understand what your own product does, let alone what they do. Some of it can also be the seniority or lack thereof. Like at a major corporation, someone who is I'll speak to the roles I understand best, like a chief marketing officer, is not necessarily going to understand the ins and outs of, or not necessarily going to the ins and outs of certain kinds of tactics and certain kinds of media. The CMO might approve what goes on a billboard, but they might not have actually bought an out-of-home ad campaign. And so it, depending on if you're targeting the buyer or the decision maker, can also be a big factor in terms of what kind of jargon you use and how deep or broad you get there.
Oh, that's all good, and yeah. So in the end, I think what I heard is be audience centered. So who is it written for, and making sure you're communicating in terms that they understand and can respond to.
Mhm.
So maybe one last topic, and actually you used the term ROI, return on investment, just a couple of moments ago. So let's talk about metrics, because obviously, there are all these modes and there are all these ways to create attention and to engage prospects. But how do you begin to quantify sort of what's working and what isn't? And I think online there are certainly lots of tools for that to metric both the opting in and the conversions. But in a general sense, what are the other, how do we measure some of the other maybe less tangible ways to market?
Well, there are there are the things you can measure, and the things that are a little harder to do. So sales cycle overall becomes really key. Does it actually shorten sales cycle? Does it is the order value or order size, is that trending the right direction? Those can be really helpful. Just looking at things like meetings generated, the quality of the leads, if you're qualifying them in some way, is it leading to the right kinds of, at least mid mid process conversion? Those are all really important. Sometimes the intangibles become really important. I worked for a CEO once on the agency side who his biggest KPI was when he picked up the phone with a prospect or a client or someone else in the industry, and they said that they've heard a lot about the agency lately. To him, that was huge, and I didn't really need to measure anything. I told my team, we're going to measure all the stuff that my boss is not telling me to measure, because I think this is important. Same thing with if a salesperson saying, if this is really helpful to them, it's just helping them do their jobs better, then it might not initially show up in terms of their close rates, even how fast they close a deal. But if a salesperson is saying that marketing is helpful, like, they're not going to blow smoke. They're extremely tough. Often it's the founder themselves doing sales in an earlier stage environment. Then you're just going to know, is this working for you or not? And then, like, great, then you'll figure out some of the measurement pieces later, because especially something where you have when you do have a longer sales cycle, then it could be really hard, especially when you're just doing a lot of things. Like it's okay that you don't measure everything, that your tools for doing so are imperfect. Like, you can get there as you scale. You can invest more in that later on, but just having some sense at the outset of saying, here's what your goals are. How can you at least try to go and get a sense of if it's meeting them? And then sometimes you could just be like, you know what, this is actually doing a lot, but I'm not feeling it in the business, so something is off, or I can't really tell how much it's doing, but it's just making us come off as a stronger company. We look better out there. We look like we can compete against the major players in our space better. So then you probably want to keep doing that, and then buy some more time to figure out the measurement side.
Yeah, no, it's all good points. The measurement is kind of one of those things. At least my observation has been, usually you don't know what measurements early on are going to be the real drivers in the business, and so having sort of a broad view on measures can be really important. And as you go forward, the right sort of metrics sort of come to the surface. And one that we for most clients now seems to be a really good and probably the top indicator of success is the number of first appointments created.
Yeah.
And that gives us a couple of different views, right? So number one is we know how many interactions in a trade show it takes to get that first appointment, because we can simply, look at, 30 days after a trade show and say how many first appointments were created from, this list. And you go, okay, well, there were 5 and we met 40 people. We know that, it's a 1 in 8 become first appointments. And then it's pretty simple math from there to know how many first appointments end up converting. And the unfortunate, and the reason we kind of have gone to first appointments is because our clients typically have a 6 to 24 month sales cycle. And it's, we don't want to wait 24 months to know the effectiveness of a trade show when it's really just a formula from, sort of first appointments to close. We know that a certain number of those first appointments are going to make it to the proposal stage, and a certain number of those proposals will end up getting a yes. And so from there, those are just, ratios that we'll understand over time and be able to become very predictable. And the cool thing is when that becomes predictable, and we know that, this number of first appointments creates this number of sales, we can actually, what we've been able to do with some clients is set sales targets for given shows. So we can actually back into how many new prospects need to be generated at the booth each day in an event to create that number of appointments that we know is going to create that number of sales. And so you can actually, the cool thing is you can actually measure your success on the show floor each day and actually give each individual sort of a target number of prospects that they're responsible to generate. And so it's using the metrics in that way has really kind of helped empower the booth team to be more productive, and also to know when they're successful, to know when they've kind of done a good job, versus that sort of, hey, I got a big stack of cards, which is the normal, and as opposed to, really focusing on high quality prospects and looking at that prospect generation as an integral part of sort of accomplishing a certain sales outcome. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's a very useful metric.
Yeah, and I think, I think unless, at least what we found is you have to have the patience with it to let it sort of mature over a couple of quarters, maybe even a year, so that you get all of the sort of the parts of that system in place. And you can, we've actually even used so if you look at, let's say a company does, say 10 trade shows in a year or whatever the number is, measuring the success of each trade show, and so that you know the number of first appointments generated by event, and the costs, both the hard and the soft costs, the time or the dollars and the time, but the ability to be able to then rank those shows. And we've actually made it a practice now to go to the bottom 5 of the 10 producers, to go to the bottom 5 and say, hey, we like your audience, we like your show. Can you help us get this? We want to do your show again next year, but we can't do it if you're in the bottom 5. So how do we get your show to be more productive? And it's 2 functions, right? It's either going to be lowering the cost or improving the visibility in that event. And so, that's might be booth location, it might be additional things that they can add in, or it might be a reduction of cost or a combination of that. So the metrics can be, it seems like they can be used in a very informative way to better partner with your media, with all your media sources or your mode, the various mode sources, to also optimize the modes that you're using. But I don't know if you've had experience with that, or you've seen other applications of that.
No, I mean, I think what you're saying is spot on. So and not a ton to add there, but yeah, I think that's a really smart direction. It's interesting to see, but sometimes obviously
all the companies that are coming into the U.S., sort of, need traction, and most are venture backed, so they need to have a pathway to scale. So having that, sort of greater predictability. So we have kind of almost look at it like, when they're entering, it's maybe like between where they are and that first customer is sort of a very circuitous serpentine dirt path. And it's, there are a lot of mistakes made along the way. There are a lot of wrong turns. And sort of by the end of that first, 6 or 12 months, that we need to know enough that it's a straight 1-lane paved road, so we can repeat the sales process and generate additional sales. And then sort of after that, that phase 2 is how do we make this, multi-lane and ideally the Autobahn, so that there are 6, 10, 12 lanes. So can scale sideways the number of salespeople following the same process down the same road, and so that, or maybe it's multiple locations within the U.S., but that you can scale or expand that, so that not everybody is discovering their and pioneering the process to create customers, but they're more following a process. And but it seems like metrics can add a lot to be able to sort of optimize and sort of prove and disprove the various hypotheses around kind of what works, if that makes sense. This is David, I got to say, this has been really fantastic. I think you gave so many great insights. Are there, when you look at the B2B companies that are most successful in entering the U.S. market, are there 2 or 3 things that kind of come to mind that they absolutely do that separates them apart from the companies that maybe don't do quite as well?
Well, so much of it goes back to that balance. It's being able to pay attention to solving some immediate need, and also focus on what's that long-term goal that they're also shooting for, and where they want to be, and what that even just how their competitive landscape will shift over time. The idea of just being so clear in that there's that phrase that comes up more from the venture capital side, that where you can't just be better than what's out there. Like, if you're coming in as an upstart, you have to be 10 times better than what's out there. And so whatever that means exactly, and clearly, it's not like every new startup improves something by 1,000%, but having some of that coming in there saying even a bit of that swagger behind it, and saying, this is what you do better than anyone else, and here's how, and just making sure that as people like saying on Twitter a lot these days, you bring receipts, you show some of the proof of that statement, then that goes a really long way, and it's amazing to see how much success there is on the B2B front these days, and addressing both a lot of pain points on the enterprise side, but you also have people who millions of people now who never planned to be in business for themselves, and now need access to all the tools and services to be able to do so. So I've spent more on my business over the past year than I ever have, and I know I'm not alone in that case. So I really appreciate when, and that's been a mix of services and technologies. So I really appreciate when there are folks that are solving real problems out there. I've got more pain points than I can list. So and I know that that's true at every level, and so and it's only going to be more true as some more of that optimism comes back, as people get together again, as people are just really hungry to also support people that they like working with and see to each other's success. And so I think that there's that as we come out of this hibernation, that there's a lot of opportunity to seize if you've got something real to offer.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. So we're going to close up, but before we do, certainly we'll share your contact info in the description below, but is there a favorite way for people to communicate with you?
Yeah, well, most channels I'm D Berkowitz, definitely, like LinkedIn's easy. Anyone who's interested in the community side and learning from other marketers to whatever extent that's actually in your title today. I like having a mix of people, whether that's true or not. But at serialmarketers.net and that and if you just even mention its context, that there's a join now for free button. Like if you just mention that you heard about on this show, then great, like all the better. So I can make sure to fast track that, and it's just good to know who's influencing your decisions out there. So I know that Bill, you've referred some tremendous people my way, and I'm such a big fan of the community and network you've built. So I know people who are tuning into you are just precisely people I like dealing with.
Well, that's very kind, David. So it's just fantastic to spend some time with you today, and really appreciate all the wisdom you shared. But thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate you thinking of me for this and having me here.
Oh, great stuff. So to our audience, make sure that you like this podcast, like this video, and please subscribe as well so you keep up to date on what we're doing. And as always, keep working hard and keep slaying the dragons. So thank you all for paying attention and your attention today.